It is, first of all, really exciting to be doing this because I feel like even if you're not watching it in real time, I feel like this is a thing that people, I've been tagged in 2 posts now about sourdough before Pesach. So I feel like this is a really big topic that at least I am interested in and curious about. And also, Rabbi Daniel Chorny has just been making great sourdough for a while. And so to be able to know how to make it and what to make is very exciting. So, and here comes Jenny Asher, which is very funny because Jenny and her husband are going to be making soft matzah with us at the end of this experience. So here we have sourdough, and at the end we will have soft matzah, and together we are a kehila. Anyway, Rabbi Daniel Chorny is a wonderful human being as well as a wonderful sourdough maker. And just very excited to have you and to learn with you and to be able to ask you all these questions. So go ahead.
Well,
And
thank you very much.
is your wife just here to tease us, or is she actually here? Oh, okay. You don't
I
know.
don't really know.
Oh, she's in the dark.
I'm
She's,
putting kids to bed. This is what a
Oh,
20s, this is here to teach all the 20s and 30 somethings who are having more fun than I am, that they're having more fun than I am.
got it. Okay.
all right. So before we get started, I want to sort of say a little bit about what got me doing sourdough and where I am with it right now. And I think that this is actually a really wonderful activity for rabbinical students and rabbi types. And I'll get into that in just a moment. As you all know, sourdough has become sort of this thing over the pandemic, among various other food projects that people have taken on. And I don't know, I just thought it would be interesting to give it a shot. And we had a wonderful gift of a starter given to us by Lori Harrison Port. And it has been a gift that has continued to give, and we're very appreciative of that. As I do my thing right now, I'm not going to actually be baking before your eyes because it takes between 24 and 72 hours to do sourdough, at least the way that I have come to doing it. So I've done a bunch of videos of myself at various stages during a run of sourdough. And it was a while ago that I made those videos, so I don't remember all the details I put into them. So there might be some repetition between things that I say and things that are on the videos, but that's okay because repetition is good for learning. The other thing I'll say is about what I was saying about how it's good for rabbi types and rabbinical students, and I'd say anyone who is in the sort of caring and service industry, as it were, to have an activity such as sourdough baking, because at the end of the day, you can do all this work inside your head and on your computer and everything, and you don't have anything tangible as an output for your work. And I know that when I was in rabbinical school, I had a lot of days where I would get to the end of the day and go, what did I actually accomplish today? What did I actually do today? It's such an ephemeral thing to be learning and to be working one's mind. So to have an activity that lets you get into your body, to work your muscles, to follow discrete steps that at the end of the day, at the end of the process, you end up with something that you can hold, something you can share, something you can taste. I find that very therapeutic. And if it goes poorly, it's low stakes. You just toss it out and try again. And I think there's something very remarkable to be able to do that. Which in many other parts of my life, you just can't do that. You can't get a do-over. So let me introduce you to my lovely assistant. This is our sourdough starter. We've named them Krusty.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why we named the starter, but we read somewhere that if you name it, it's good for the starter.
I think your child named it, if I remember the story correctly.
Maybe we'll have to ask my child if she recalls. In any event, I'll also refer to Krusty as the starter because crusty as a starter. All right. And if you've never had a sourdough starter before, it's very easy to start one. It's very easy to keep one. So all it is equal parts water and flour. And what you do is you leave it on the counter. I usually leave the cap off. And if you're starting a brand new sourdough from nothing, then it's going to take the yeast that's naturally occurring in the air around you. And over time, as you keep refeeding it and rejiggering it, it'll start to develop those microbes. Or if you have a friend who has starter, they can package some for you and you can take it home and then you start to work it out. You don't have to feed it every single day. In fact, if you do feed it every single day, it's not going to taste like much of anything. So if you start it for a couple of days at a time, it gets more sour, it gets more flavorful. If you are afraid that it's going to die on you, you can always put it in the fridge, but I recommend pulling it out of the fridge and waking it up 2 or 3 days in advance before you get going, because you really want it active. So that's your starter.
I think Jenny has a question for you.
Okay.
I do. I don't know if you said, I might have missed it. What do you feed it with?
You feed it equal parts flour and water.
Okay.
So, and by the way, with feeding, there's 2 strategies. There's the sort of regular feeding, which involves dumping a lot of it at a time. So you end up discarding roughly half of it every time you feed it in that way. And that's not a bad thing. You know, we end up with sourdough waffles, sourdough crumpets, sourdough pretzels, you know, things that you make with a discard. Or you can do what I do, which is a micro feed. So every other day or every couple of days, whatever it is, I will put in 1 ounce of flour and 1 ounce of water, mix it up, and that's enough. It keeps it going, keeps it active. And once the jar starts to get full, then I'll do a discard and either dump it or make something out of it. So it's the kind of project that keeps spinning off spin-offs, as it were. All right. Let's see. Let's talk about tools for a second. You need a mixing bowl. This is a rather large one. It doesn't have to be this large. You need a bench scraper. These come in 2 varieties that I've seen so far: plastic and metal.
That's the one I have.
It's a wonderful tool. The only caveat I'll use is that if you're using a silicone mat like this one, then you want to use the plastic one because the metal will just cut right through it. No need for measuring spoons. Measuring cups, no need. Okay. We cling to the imperial system in this country, but grams are going to make things much easier for you. So a simple kitchen scale that works in grams and ounces is the only measuring tool you really need. Then, hi. This is called a lame. This is one that came from the factory, and it's basically a razor blade with a handle. And this is used for the scoring process. I've found that regular razor blades from the store work better. And you can just use a razor blade by hand, or you can put a handle on it with a toothpick chopstick or something. And this is a Dutch oven. So you don't necessarily need a Dutch oven, but it's highly recommended because it's a high moisture bread. And that means that you want the moisture to be retained for the first phase of baking. And so having a heavy cast iron Dutch oven is going to provide that. And it makes much more, I'd say much more consistently good bread. Let's make sure I don't forget any tools. Yes. These are called proofing baskets. There's a fancy French word for them. I can't remember what it is, so I'm not going to butcher it right now. These are important for the pre-baking phase. All right, I believe those are our tools. Oh, and lots of flour, okay? This is one of those projects where more flour is good because more flour prevents things from sticking. and things will stick, and that's okay. You just start again, or you try to reshape it. It's very forgiving. So one thing that makes sourdough differentiated from other breads, aside from the fact that it's using a live yeast that you find locally, possibly, is that it's a high moisture bread. So breads are spoken of in different percentages of moisture. So if it's 1-to-1, then you're at 100% moisture, right? If it is 2-to-1, then you're at 50% moisture. That is the water being 1 and 2 units of flour. For a sourdough, professional bakers will keep it somewhere around 80% moisture. So the easy way to remember this is, if you are, whatever amount of flour you're using, you want to use 80% of that amount in water. But because I'm an amateur, and I suspect other people around this room, this Zoom, are amateurs as well, I usually keep my moisture about 70%. That way I have a little bit more wiggle room. It's a little bit more forgiving, a little bit more malleable. But if you really want to go for it, 80% is sort of the traditional ratio for sourdough. So when you're starting out, I would use a round number. So I started out by doing 1,000 grams of flour, which is a considerable amount of flour, and 80% of that would be 800 grams. So 70% would be like 750 grams of water to that. Okay. And you can experiment up and down a little bit, but after a certain point, you're not going to get the same results if you're going too low or too high on your moisture.
Can I ask a question?
Sorry?
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
So when you are feeding it, you're doing these micro feeds, but then when you go to actually make sourdough is when you're doing the numbers that you just shared.
So the numbers that I just shared are not of the starter.
Right.
Those are of the dough ingredients.
Right. Okay. So then great. So my follow up to that is, how much starter do you use? And maybe you said that and I just missed it.
I have not said that. I'm about to get to that, but thanks for asking.
Okay.
So your first step, once you're ready to bake, is going to be making sure you have enough time to bake. Okay, because you have to think at least 24 hours in advance of when you want to have the bread. Okay, so I usually start my sourdough Wednesday, Thursday morning at the latest, so that I have time to have it ready for Shabbat. And the first step in the actual baking process is what's called a leaven, or levain. I think it's a leaven. So if you're thinking about Pesach and you think, oh, we got to get rid of all our leaven, this is what we're talking about. In my bowl, I have put in equal parts flour and water, 25 grams flour, 25 grams water. You can do 50, 50. It doesn't matter as long as it's equal amounts. Although the more dough you're going to make, probably the higher the amount you're going to start with. But 25, 25 or 50, 50 is pretty good. And then, this is the kicker, you don't need any more than 1 tablespoon of your starter. You can put more in if you're concerned that your starter is not active enough. But what you want to do is you want to get your starter in there when it's at peak. What that means is when you've fed it and it's bubbled up to about twice its usual its previous volume. When it's at peak, that's when the yeast is as active as it's going to get, and that's when you want to scoop it out and put it in there. And that's it. It's equal parts flour and water and 1 spoonful of the starter. You can put a little bit more. It won't hurt it. It can be a little less. It won't hurt it. This leaven is not ready to use yet. I make it the day before I'm going to start baking, and I leave it overnight. And you'll see that already it's starting to form little bubbles in the dough. That is the yeast from the starter doing its thing, doing its magic. So at this time, I'm going to divert us to a video just to show you the steps. And if you'll bear with me.
This is so great. I'm very, very excited by this.
Okay, here we go. So the first step before baking and after having gotten your sourdough starter active is to create what's called a leaven. And all this really is an expansion of your starter into a more active form. And what you do is you take equal parts flour and water. Now, any kind of flour will do, but I like to use bread flour. It seems to give it more heft and more body. So it's equal parts. So you could do 25 grams of flour and 25 grams of water. Is that repetition? Depending on how much dough you intend to make, you adjust up or down. I like to go about 50 grams of flour and 50 grams of water because I like to have a good active start. So I've already measured out 50 grams of flour onto my bowl. And then I've measured out 50 grams of water, combine them. And then you take about a spoonful of your recently woken up active sourdough starter. And that's really all you need. You could use more if you were concerned it wasn't active enough, but if you got your starter nice and awake, you shouldn't need more than a tablespoon. And then all you got to do is mix this up until it's combined properly. So you don't want any clumps. You want it to sort of be a uniform paste. I feel like I'm watching myself in
This is just the beginning of the process.
So what you really care about here is to get the starter combined with the other ingredients, the water and the flour, enough for it to start working on the gluten and the glucose that's in the flour. And when we come back to this tomorrow morning, you're going to see that it will become fluffy and bubbly and will, if all goes well, pass the float test. Keep it covered either with towel or with plastic wrap overnight, and just keep it somewhere on your shelf, hopefully away from the kids and pets, and we'll see this in the morning. Okay, so that's how you start making your leaven, and you let it go overnight. This is not a process you can do last minute, and for me, that's actually a wonderful thing because it creates space in my day, in my week, that I'm thinking about something other than what's immediately in front of me, and it's as close as I come to successfully meditating doing this work. Okay, so you've made your leaven, and then you went to bed, and then you go back to the next morning, and you look at it, and you're like, well, is it ready? So the next step is what we would call a float test. And all that is you take a certain amount of water, you take a little bit of the leaven that you've created, and you dump it in the water. If it floats, you're ready to go. If it doesn't float, then just let it keep going for a while. It needs a little bit more time to get more air, more gases into the mix. And I believe I have a short clip. Hopefully it's mercifully short. Let's see here. When are we going till?
Technically 8, but
Hi.
you can go longer because you didn't start till like 7:15. So
Okay.
keep
So this
going.
is me the next day. So now you can see that our leaven has become more uniform. It has full of these nice little bubbles to indicate that the yeast is active and working. So what we're going to do now is do a float test. And all that is we're going to take a little bit of water, and we're going to see if the leaven is buoyant. That is, if it is low enough in density that it will float in water. So we take a little bit of the leaven and we just drip it in to the water, and you can see that the little glob there is floating. If it's not floating, then you probably want to let it go for a little bit longer. And if it's not floating consistently, you may want to add a little bit more of your starter. So before we get to the next bit, because clearly I'm about to show you the next step here. Now that we have an active leaven, we're going to break it apart with water and then begin our dough. So now that we have our leaven, we're ready to start actually making the bread. So what we do is we make sure that we have our proportions correct. So the best thing to do is to have a kitchen scale. I got this one really cheaply on Amazon. And the reason you want to be precise with the weights is because when it comes to bread, your proportions are very critical. So sourdough tends to be what's called a high hydration bread. And what that means is that the proportion of water to flour is going to be rather high. So professional bakers will have their sourdough at somewhere around 80% hydration, which means that for every 100 grams of flour, they would use 80 grams of water. Up till now, the leaven is 50-50, right? So it's right now at 100% hydration. So we're not going to consider that. But I've pre-measured 500 grams of bread flour right here. And I've pre-measured 350 grams of water. Now that's not 80%, that is 70%. I've found that if you start from a slightly lower hydration, then you're going to be, you'll have an easier time with moving the dough around. You'll have it'll be a little bit more forgiving. You have room for some error. So I recommend getting yourself a proportion to get to about 70% hydration. So now that we know that the leaven is good to go, we take our water and we pour it over the leaven. And what you want to do here is you want to break up the leaven. It doesn't have to be completely dissolved, but you want to break it up so that the bottom is not stuck to the bottom of the bowl, and so that it's sort of becoming free floating within this water. And then you take your flour. Again, I've pre-measured 500 grams of flour. And you want to mix that pretty well. You can use your bare hands, you can use a rubber spatula, you can use anything. This part's not critical. What you do want to make sure you do is make sure that all of the flour comes in contact with the water. And it's going to come to a shaggy dough is what they call it. And I'll show you what that means in a moment. Shaggy, if you're not a baker, means that you can see like streams, like strings of the dough, and it's incorporated. It all looks like one thing, but it's sort of fibrous. Thus, the shaggy description. And this can take a little while. No need to rush it. You know, it's gonna get there, whether you take a long time or a short time. That's not going to make much difference. If you ask me about using a mixer, I don't own a mixer. I'm sure that if I did, this would be a much easier and simpler process. But there's something very satisfying about getting your hands in there and using your muscles to move this around. And because this is only the beginning of the process, it's going to become very uniform on its own. And I kind of like that. This is a bread that takes time, it takes patience, and it takes allowing the yeast to do its job. Okay, so just giving you a few more turns around to see and to make sure that every part of my flour has come in some contact with the water. Okay, and as you can see, this is a very shaggy dough. You see all these little fibers, these little strings. You know, it kind of pulls almost like kinetic sand might look. Okay, and once this is done, which it is, we've entered the phase called the autolyse or autolyse. I'm not entirely sure what the pronunciation is. So for this phase, we're going to cover the bowl, and we're going to leave this out, again, on the counter without interfering with it, for 30 minutes to 4 hours. The longer you let this go, the easier it's going to be to do the next step. And what the autolyse is basically allowing for the water to penetrate into the flour, allowing for the hydration to take hold, and allowing for the yeast to get started on the flour. Okay, so autolyse. That is as I said in the video, that is letting the bread do its thing on its own. That's leaving it alone. 30 minutes is minimum, but if you can get closer to 4 hours, you're gonna have a much nicer time of it. It's gonna come out much, I'd say much fluffier, if that's something you're looking for. Okay, any questions up till now?
No question, but I just want to say that I totally agree with the meditation piece. I am not a meditator, as your wife knows abundantly well. And I also don't have a mixer, but there is something so nice about being able to really like put your hands to work in this kind of way, because even if it doesn't come out exactly the way that you wanted it to, there's just something really spiritual and meditative about it. And I really, not to make this too like rabbinic and Jewish, but I really think that our rabbis knew that when they talked about making challah and when they talked about making matzah. Like there's something really connecting and really spiritual and as you said, meditative about the process. And even just watching you do it and not doing it myself right now, there's something just really, I don't know, cathartic and wonderful about it. So I just wanted to say thanks.
You're welcome. It's funny. We're living in this moment where we have all these companies doing videos of like above shots of people doing various kinds of cooking, like the tasty videos and all that. And I think it's definitely of our moment. Isn't this program called Torah on tap? No need to apologize for the rabbinics. Aha, shkoyach. Okay. Let's see here. So autolyse. So it's, go watch a movie, go play with your kids if you have them, go, I don't know, have something on tap. Just chill, because the bread is doing the work for you at that point. And then, now we're going to get into the folding. So let's go back to the Wonder Machine. While your autolyse is happening. Ah, yes, forgot about that. I forgot an ingredient when I was listening before. You need salt. Not much. You need about 1/4 of a teaspoon of salt, which is about 6 grams of salt. And you need a little bit of water. I believe I use something like 25 grams or 50 grams of water. That amount is not so important, especially if you're starting at 70% hydration, because any amount of water you're adding is not going to bring you over the 80% threshold unless you're adding a lot of water. So this is going to be a quick how to make the salt ready. You want to make sure that you have salt ready for seasoning the bread when the time comes. So here I have about a tablespoon of salt. It doesn't matter what kind of salt you use. I used, in this case, I've used pink Himalayan sea salt. But you can use table salt, you can use kosher salt. It really doesn't make that much difference because your proportion is going to be the same. So I used about a teaspoon, which is about 4.5 to 6 grams of salt. And I'm going to slowly dissolve it into about 50 grams of water. Now, it's not going to dissolve all at once right before your eyes. So it's important that you are occasionally swirling it or stirring it. Give it a chance to saturate the water. So if you've ever done water for Pesach, for your salt water, you know how to do this. And so over the course of the 30 minutes to 4 hours of the autolyse, I will come back to this and occasionally swish it around and Try to get as much of it dissolved as possible. It's okay if some of the salt is not fully dissolved. It won't make a difference in the end, but you want the water to be rather salty when the time comes. Okay, so now let's fast forward to after the autolysis is completed. So it's been a few hours of autolysis, and if you look at the dough, you'll see that it's no longer nearly as shaggy as it was when we got started. It's sort of integrated and has expanded a considerable amount. So now we're ready to add the salted water, and as you can see from my bowl here, most of the salt has dissolved into the water. Let me just get a better angle on that. Okay, there's a little bit left of the solid salt, and that's okay. It just adds more flavor. And what you're going to do at this stage is have clean hands, of course, and you're going to pour the water over the dough. And you're going to gently, trying not to deflate it too much, pinch and pull a number of times so that the salt water gets integrated into the dough. And you can be, you can be gentle, but no need to be afraid. It's not really going to stick to your hands very much. And this adds a little bit more moisture to the dough. Then, once the dough is wet and integrated with the salt water, it's going to look pretty slick and ribbony. Okay? And at this point, you're going to wait another half hour to start folding. We're going to fold it a total of 6 times over 2.5 hours. But first, we're going to let it settle into itself before we start folding again. So, Echo, set a timer for 30 minutes.
30 minutes, starting now.
See you then. Okay, so just to review those numbers for a second. You've waited 30 minutes to 4 hours of autolysis. Now you've added your salt water. Now you're waiting 30 minutes for it to sort of settle into itself, to sort of become of one piece all over again. And you'll see consistently that this bread likes to reintegrate into itself. What's good for sourdough is also good for people. Like before you start stirring people up, let them like settle into themselves, and then you can teach them something that they may not be ready to learn. Good thing to learn from our breads. So the total number of folds is going to be 6. You can probably do a few fewer, probably do more, but 6 is the number that I got from my research into this matter. And what you want to accomplish with the folding is you're helping the yeast's gases to remain in the dough. You're creating pockets for the air to remain in it and to further develop the dough. Okay, so my alarm just went off, and as you can see, the dough has reincorporated into itself. It's a sort of uniform substance, a little bit wrinkly, and you can see that it is visibly larger than when we started. And now I'm going to show you how to fold the dough. So unlike regular bread that you would knead the dough, this is a very delicate, very, very high hydration kind of recipe. So you don't really need to knead it, but you do need to make folds in order for the gases from the yeast to get trapped in. So for folding, it's quite simple. You take your hand, you dig it in, and you stretch and pull over. Turn the bowl 90 degrees, grab from the bottom, stretch, and pull it over. And do it again, 90 degrees, and pull it over. And once again, pull it over. And that's one cycle of folding. And you're going to do this a total of 6 times every 30 minutes for 2.5 hours. So again, over the course of 2.5 hours, every 30 minutes, you do a cycle of folding. Not that you do it, you don't do 6 every 30 minutes. Okay. Any questions about the folding? Okay. Let me see, double check the chat, make sure that I'm not missing anyone's questions.
I asked you a question about salt.
Why wouldn't you add the salt when you add the water before? I've seen recipes that have the salt at the beginning and recipes that have it later. I think that because salt might inhibit the yeast a little bit. So to give it a fighting chance to really get going, you delay the salting. I haven't done enough experiments to know if it makes an appreciable difference, but I like the fact that when you add the salt as water, it mixed in water at that stage, you take a dough that is getting kind of dry and you're rehydrating it. So you're going to lose a little bit of moisture at every step of this process. And if you are starting, especially if you're starting at a lower moisture, like 70%, like I started, being able to restart that moisture, get it wet again is helpful. But I don't know exactly if it has an effect on the taste.
Got it.
Good question, and thank you for it. Let us continue. So I'm going to fast forward. I saved us the trouble of watching me fold the thing 6 times. Trust me, that's what I did. And after that last fold, then we let it settle for another 30 minutes. Or 20 to 30 minutes.
So I've elapsed 2 hours, actually about 3 hours since the initial folding. And so I've folded the dough 6 times, letting it rest 30 minutes after every folding. And then it rested for another 30 minutes. So now we're going to take the dough and bring it out of the bowl. My mother-in-law gave me this wonderful silicone mat that helps to keep the flour in place, and
shout out to Stacy.
Very nice and easy. You don't need one of these. You could just use a regular surface and just flour it generously and lightly. So that the dough will come off the counter. Otherwise, you may end up with a lot of dough stuck to your counter. So your flour is your friend during this. You want to keep a healthy amount of flour nearby, just for powdering, keeping the dough going, and keeping your hands from getting stuck. I've gone ahead and lined my proofing basket. So you take flour and you just sort of generously work it into a flat-ish sort of layer around your basket. When you use this for the first time, you want to spray it with some water to get a little bit moisture so that there's a layer of flour stuck to it. And this is one of those things where it's okay to overdo it on the flour. It won't damage the bread, and it actually will make it easier to remove the dough from it after.
That's from experience, where I did not flour my proofing baskets enough, and I ended up with like half the bread sort of stuck to the basket, and it never comes out right. And that's going to happen a few times when you do this, and it's okay. But if you want to avoid it, then don't get what do you call it? Don't get overly cautious about the amount of flour you're using. Use more flour, not less.
Did your basket come with little shirts?
Yes. My baskets came with these little
shower caps.
So if you use the basket on its own, you end up with a nice sort of spirally texture on the outside of your bread. If you use these, you got to use a lot of flour also. It just comes out smooth. Okay. I use these when I am making more than 2 loaves, because I only have 2 of these. And I'll line a regular mixing bowl or a regular bowl with these. Smart. And it helps me to expand my reach. But you don't have to use them.
Got it. Great.
So then I'm gonna turn out my dough onto the table. Okay. And it's very important not to mash it down to keep it risen. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna do what's called an initial shaping. So this is with 500 grams of flour. You can make this as a single loaf, or you could cut it in half with your plastic blade here. I guess it's called a bench scraper. And you want to get a little bit of flour on there, and you want to use a plastic one on the mat. Not the metal ones will break right through it. Okay. And you do sort of a scooping around motion to give the dough a little bit more shape. By the way, I always take challah when I'm doing a big dough. So, so I will take this and I will wrap it in foil, and then when I am baking, I will burn it in the oven because it's reserved for the Kohanim, and I don't have a Kohen who can eat it in the temple. Okay.
So,
And if you'd like to know more about that, ask Rabbi Shah.
so
Oh, thank you.
just these videos get a little bit wonky toward the end because, as it's been implied, you shouldn't start this process too late at night, and I started this process too late at night. So I was up very late doing this, and you can kind of tell when my banter starts getting a little bit more expansive.
All right. So once you get your shape roughly, and it doesn't have to be very perfectly done, you're going to rest this another 20 to 30 minutes so that the glutens get to settle down and give it more of its shape. See you in a little bit.
Okay, so up until this point, we've made our dough, we've folded it, we've let it rest enough, we're resting it for one final time before we put it in our proofing baskets, just so that the gluten fibers can reconfigure to hold the shape of the thing. That is in fact that's a Ramah, Wisconsin sweatshirt.
Oh, it looks like the JTS, we make rabbinical students, we don't burn bushes, the whole slogan that JTS has.
Well, remember that every Ramah camp except for Ojai is owned by JTS.
Yeah, no, I know. Your wife appreciated that joke, so I'm glad I got a good laugh from one Chorny.
I mean, they burn all sorts of other plants. All right.
So it's been 20 minutes since I gave the initial shape to the loaf, and now it's time to get ourselves into the proofing basket. So I've got my flour here open, and I'm just going to dust the top of the loaf very gently. So this part's a little bit counterintuitive, but we're going to fold the bottom of the loaf before putting it into the basket face down. So take your scraper, a little bit of flour on it to keep it from getting stuck, and doing the same, and we're just gonna do it same motion a little bit, and then we're going to roll the dough onto its top, and we're going to lift it into the basket, and we're going to tuck in its edges.
So this is me messing up because really I usually flip it then tuck in the edges, and I pick it up from there and put it down onto the basket. I don't think it makes much difference that I did it out of order here, but just full disclosure.
So just like how I folded the dough earlier, folding into the middle so that the edges use a nice tight shape at the top. So then you want to let this rest for up to 6 hours, but no less than 4. Or you can cover it lightly with a towel and put it in the refrigerator overnight. Either way, it comes out excellent. So I think I'm going to be putting mine in the refrigerator because it is late, and I will get this in the oven tomorrow morning.
Yeah, it was pretty late by the time I got to that stage. Okay, so now you've got your bread in a proofing basket. If you don't own a proofing basket, you can use other alternatives, although I don't know what the result ends up being, but make sure you use enough flour so it doesn't get stuck to whatever it is you're using. By the way, I have these rounds. These also come in a sort of oblong shape.
Yeah.
And as far as I can tell, the taste is no different, but it might be more convenient if you're like, sliced bread kind of person. This is really good for like bread bowls for soup and that kind of thing. And it's also good for getting artistic with the lemay, and we'll see that in just a moment.
All right, so I just pulled the bread out of the refrigerator, and as you can see, it has expanded. It's never going to be as fluffy as a fast yeast kind of bread, but you can definitely tell that it's puffed. Now, for this step, I like to have parchment paper. It makes things a little bit easier to transfer the dough out of the basket. Now, if I floured the basket enough, it should come right out. So we invert onto our surface. Hope that it's working. Aha!
Prayer.
And it comes right up. Don't worry about all the excess flour. You can always brush it off, or not. It doesn't make a difference. I mean, it gets a little bit messy, but it doesn't affect the taste. So this next step is the scoring step. So you may buy a nifty device like this called a lemay. Well, all it is really a razor blade that's been bent and shaped to be for this purpose. I find that these are pretty bad. Like, they're good for like maybe 1 or 2 goes, and then they get dull. I later learned about grabbing razor blades, like for shaving, and attaching them with rubber bands to a skewer or to a chopstick. And I find this is much, much neater for this purpose. And you can go crazy if you want. So if you're doing the sort of vertical, baguette style loaf, then it's cut. Then the usual things to do, like 1 slice across. This allows for the bread to sort of pull apart a little bit and gives a little bit more character, a little bit more shape. With a round like this, I try to go for symmetrical things, but there's no wrong way to do this. So just for our purposes, I'm going to cut smoothly across the surface. Not terribly deep, but deep enough for there to be some pull away. And I think I'm going to go across the other way. So now we have a crossed loaf. And then I like to add little details when I have enough surface to work on. So I'll do a little bit like this, maybe. A little bit like that. Again, there's no wrong way. This is not going to affect the taste of the bread, per se. But if you are thinking about gifting it, it will definitely change the appearance. And it's a nice little flourish if you can get it to work nicely. But again, that's an aesthetic thing that if you do the bread right, no one's going to care what it looks like. It's going to be delicious. Okay. So every slice, if it's done properly, will pull apart a little bit as the bread expands in the oven. Yeah, it's going to expand a little bit more. And we're ready to put in the oven. I've preheated my oven with the Dutch oven inside at 500 degrees. Let me double check my inside oven thermometer to make sure that it's where I want it. It's exactly where I want it. And the reason I'm using a Dutch oven is because it helps to keep the moisture in while the bread is having its initial bake. So it's going to be baking in 3 phases. First, it's going to be in the Dutch oven with the lid on at 500 degrees for 20 minutes. Then, without touching the oven, turning the temperature down to 450 for another 10 minutes. And then uncovered for increments of 15 minutes at a time until it gets to my desired darkness. Got a little smoke in here from when I was seasoning the Dutch oven earlier. But the seasoning is less important since I'm using parchment paper, so it shouldn't stick. I like using the parchment paper as it helps me to move the bread. Goes right in. I try to move quickly so that things stay on temperature. And again, that's going to be 20 minutes at 500 degrees, then lower the temperature to 450 and bake for another 10 minutes, and then uncover it and just keep it in the oven and bake it for 15-minute intervals until your desired darkness. The darker you get it, the more flavorful it'll be, but also the harder the crust will be. So you have to sort of balance between how much effort you want to put into cutting it and how much flavor you want to develop, and get it as close to burning without actually burning it. So it takes doing it a little bit at a time.
Okay, and that's a wonderful face to end on the recording.
Do you splash water on the top of your lid?
No,
Dutch oven? Okay.
no, I have not. Is that a thing?
It is a thing. It supposedly makes the crust crustier because it has moisture, and then that goes onto the non-baked bread, and then it makes a good, like, when it comes out, those bubbles start popping and you can hear them, so it makes that happen.
Interesting. I'll give that a shot sometime. I've never had to add additional water. Doesn't mean that it's not a good hack. That
It's a
might
splash. I usually take the lid over to the sink and splash, put my hand under the water and then splash it onto the lid and then put it on top.
So does the water sort of sizzle on the?
Yeah, the water sizzles and it becomes droplets, and then you put it back on the lid, on the pot.
That sounds like something worth trying. I'll give that a shot. So that's the process. That's how I make my bread. And because I tend to make more than I need, I have gotten into the practice of giving away a loaf every time I bake. I might get away from that practice as I start getting a little bit more precise about how much bread I'm making at a given moment. So I hope that I had a chance to share some of my bread with some of y'all soon. And it's really a pleasure to share this skill that I've developed over the past few months unexpectedly. I didn't think I was going to become a decent sourdough baker, but here I am, and I'm pretty proud of it. And are there any other questions or things that came up? It doesn't even have to be about bread necessarily. This is, after all, Torah on tap. So
you had mentioned making sourdough waffles and other things that are not bread with the sourdough. At what point in that process are you taking the sourdough for that?
That's what I do with discard. So
early on.
Yeah, this would be like I'm about to feed my starter to get it really active, and I need to make some space in the jar. So I can either dump half of this, a significant amount of the starter into the trash, which some people do, or I can do something with it. So I've found that there are lots of wonderful recipes for things you can do with it, such as like today I made waffles for myself and my son for breakfast, and they came out really good. Most of these recipes require some amount of baking soda to offset the sourness. As you know, sourdough is very acidic, and when you add a base such as baking soda, it neutralizes that acidity. And if you just Google any sourdough crumpets, sourdough discard recipes, and they range in variety and in difficulty, and the worst that can happen is you end up throwing it out anyway. So it's worth the go.
I also find you can make, I've done this quite a bit with mine, sourdough crackers, which are just super easy because all it is, at first I followed a recipe and, decided that I was going to do everything it said to do. And it says to like melt butter and then put the sourdough discard in it and mix it and then put herbs on top of it and put it in a pan. I started just like doing it all together and using like not dairy, like vegan butter, whatever you want to call it. And it's great. It's just like I don't usually have crackers in my house, and so it's a great thing to have like for Shabbos lunch. If you're gonna eat like tuna or something, they're just like really quick, great crackers. And it doesn't take, like if you're gonna make pretzels or sourdough pizza, which I've also made, it also takes other ingredients typically, and this is really just sourdough starter and a little bit of margarine and spices, and it's super simple.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I found that sourdough starter is very versatile. It can be used for a lot of different really interesting things.
Yeah.
I haven't made beer with it yet, but I assume that's probably a possibility. I don't know. I'm not a home brewer yet. See how long this pandemic goes for.
Have you ever made sourdough challah?
So you mean braiding it?
Yeah, I mean, sorry. I know you take challah from yours to have it be challah for Shabbat, but have you ever made like a challah-looking loaf with sourdough instead of yeast?
I have. It doesn't come out quite the way you would want it because it's such a high moisture bread. It kind of melts into itself, into a solid again. But it can be done. It's just not. It doesn't come out quite the way you would expect it to come out.
Yeah.
But maybe if you soaked the strands in like baking soda water, and like how you would do like a pretzel or a bagel, maybe that would allow it to retain the crust. I'm not sure.
They make challah silicone pans, which we use for the gluten-free bread.
Yeah, true.
Not bread, but
yeah.
Oh, the pans that like it like shapes it into the shape of a braid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
I tried it when I first started making sourdough. I tried to make a challah, and it was legitimately bad. I mean, I make pretty good bread, and it was terrible. So I just wondered if you had found a better way to do it. But
we are pretty partial to just having nice rounds.
Yeah.
Your bread will keep for about a week without going bad if you keep it like in a properly stored. Highly recommend that when you are cutting into your bread, you cut the middle outward. You cut it from the middle out. So like that video that came out some years ago about how to eat a cake properly, where you cut the middle slice and then you squeeze the two halves together to keep it, to keep the moisture in. Same thing with sourdough, actually. So you take your round, cut out the middle, eat the middle slice, which is delicious, and why would you not? And then when you want to store it, just put the two halves together tightly with, in a plastic bag or something, and it'll keep for longer.
Awesome.
I am sorry I don't have any visual aids of actual sourdough being done. It doesn't last very long in our household. Yeah, no, just Hamantaschen and other people's bread. So,
your wife just wrote, "We ate it all," so I think that it's gone.
It is gone. This has been a real pleasure to do. It's not every day I get called upon to do something that's not like Torah forward, although there is Torah embedded in the work. And I feel very privileged and blessed to have been invited to do this. So thank you, Rabbi Schatz.
Yeah.
And Stevie Green, thank you for your bourbon balls. They are delicious as always.
Always.
I only have one before I forget what I'm doing. And let's see who else is on here. Jenny, it's always good to see you. And
Aaron decided he was making an appearance.
There's the matzah man. All right.
The matzah man.
The matzah man can. Everything I've taught you, forget about it. Because Pesach is coming. And if you are a fan of Aaron Alexander's, you'll know that Karet is coming too. What'd you write to me? Thanks, Ben. That's good. So that's really all there is left of my spiel. I will say one last thing since I have your attention. I am, in addition to getting involved with sourdough baking and some other projects, I am getting involved with CLU, which is Clergy and Laity for what is it? The United for Economic Equity or something like that, economic justice. Ben attended an event that I helped to create where we're trying to get people to write letters to the governor to help hopefully get a pardon for someone who is going to be deported after having served his 26-year sentence for crimes they committed when they were 19. So if you would be interested in perhaps writing a letter of this variety, please be in touch with me because every letter helps to potentially save a person from a terrible fate. And since this is the season of miracles, perhaps we can, perhaps Revach Hatzalah can come from us and not from Makom Echer. I'm in a very poor state of mind. Someday you're going to invite me to do my talk on why Purim is actually the most important holiday we should be observing. But too late this year, I guess. Sorry. Try next year.
That's okay.
Any parting words, Rabbi Schatz?
I just want to say thank you. This was so wonderful, and I love watching cooking shows, so this really felt like time off for me. but seriously, was just such a lovely way of combining Torah and cooking and bread, and just being able to really think about sustenance in a very different way than we typically do when we're learning off of a sheet of paper. So Gam Zeh Torah, and I'm so glad that you shared it with us. And thank you. This is really, really fantastic, and just can't wait to try it.
Thank you. Hopefully we'll bring you a loaf sometime.
Thank you. And it's no coincidence that the word company, it comes from the Latin term for share, someone that you share bread with. Mm-hmm. So thank you for your company in this moment. And I really, really, really hope to be able to be in company with you all in a physical state very soon. As I said earlier, I got mine. So we're gonna beat this virus, and then we're gonna make bread together.
Amen. It's a great note to end on. Good night, everybody. If you're able to come tomorrow, Dr. Joshua Kolp is going to be teaching at 8:30 in the morning. We'd love to have you. And if not, hopefully see you over Shabbat at some point. But have a good night. Thank you, Chorny.